Hi, and welcome to the Soho Live Spotlights. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined today with the incredible TV veteran, Thea Cole, who, has just most incredible career, has worked across BAFTA, the BBC, as well as the independent sector. You've worked in loads of things, haven't you? And you have your own company as well.
Yep, just starting up my own agency because, as you say, it's been a lengthy career, but an interesting one. And I'm not sure if the descriptor of veteran is necessarily my favourite. But I know, I'm joking.
Very experienced.
But taking all of those kind of elements of television, promos, brand work, social, and putting it into one agency, which is called SmartPoint, and launching in June. So that's very exciting.
Oh, that is exciting.
Yeah.
And of course, because your experience, you've run across actual sort of production, making films, directing, as well as the marketing side of it as well, which is sometimes seen as, as a different kind of set of skills. But can we dismantle that myth?
I think so. I think it's interesting actually because, very much traditionally it was never the twain shall meet. And I was quite lucky actually because I'd started my career in regional television news, South Today. And so that's how I learned all my production skills. And then I went through BBC Events to BBC Creative. So then I learned how to make promos and be a network director and all of those things. And it just so happened that when they sold BBC Creative, I was one of the very few programme makers in the building. And so I ended up with all the brand briefs. So that's how I ended up doing brand work and digital and all of those things. And at the time it was quite frowned upon, really. I think it was sort of like, oh, you weren't a proper TV director or producer. But now, of course, everyone wants a piece of digital, so it's actually very useful and more sought after. So that's kind of how it happened, really.
And of course, something as well that I really like to speak about and what we want to talk about today is that side of the marketing of your film, because all those skills that you've learned there, a lot of people kind of see that as a bit of an afterthought, don't they? They kind of go, right, I'm going to make a film and then afterwards I'm going to promote it. But actually, I know you're a big believer in that you've got to know your audience first.
Yeah.
You need to talk about these things first. Have those skills come from your experience? And why? What makes you believe this?
Well, I think even in formal television production companies still, often the promo campaign is thought about after the concept, and nobody's suggesting that you change your concept because of your marketing. But actually, if you have marketing front of mind, particularly if you're an independent filmmaker from the get-go, it actually maybe might change your decision making a little bit. So it's worth sort of really thinking about who the film is for, because no one wants to tell a story to no one, do they? If you're that motivated, you're going to get the story, write the script, find your crew and your cast and go and find money, then you want people to see your film. So it's the same principle as if you want anyone to buy your product or you want somebody to notice your sort of social platform or something, you need to think about who you're making it for in the first place. And back in the day, you used to get a lot of briefs that were sort of 25 to 45. Well, in my view, be more narrow than that, be more specific. So your lovely film, about domestic abuse, who is that actually trying to speak to? Well, we've talked about this before, Liz, so potentially women who are experiencing what that character experiences, but also potentially men who, may know people who are perpetrating that kind of behaviour and can influence them. So that's two distinct audiences, and you would take the direction and the marketing of the film in different ways depending which one you were considering, I would say. So having that front of mind right from the beginning is a really good way of looking at casting, looking at location, looking at, production design. All of those things are affected by who the film is targeting.
And how do you find the audience? Some it's quite simple to go, oh well, this reaches out to these people, but I know sometimes we get such a different array of films here. How would you go about working out what audience fits which one?
Well, a lot of it is kind of up to you, really. It's like who are you telling the story to? If you could sort of pick an audience and put it in front of your film, who would they be? And really sort of almost disseminate that and examine that a little bit. And we used to have this method when I was in the BBC, and I don't know if they still use it, but BBC Marketing had a brief which I always remember us get to by. So it was get someone to do something by doing something else. So get Liz to watch my film by telling her it's about great bright coloured jumpers, is that sort of, so it sort of crystallises your message, if you like, and it's quite a good discipline if you had to actually say what it is you're trying to do in one sentence, or if you actually had to encapsulate the story of your film into a 30-second promo. It really hones the mind. So it can be whoever you want. And then once you've decided on that audience, then the holy grail is how do you reach them, really?
Yes. And how would you? So, I mean, I suppose for like a younger audience, you look at like, say, social media, an older audience. What are some of the ways you would reach out?
I mean, everyone's sort of very familiar with social and influencer marketing and all of that lovely stuff. But, it's not an exact science, so you can kind of test and learn with those things. You can also reach out to people of influence. They don't have to be famous influencers, but somebody who has a following in the audience that you're targeting. So say you want to target people who are into gardening, for example. Get on Insta and find some young people who've got good followings for their gardening pages. Then you can sort of reach out to them. May not cost you very much money, but you can give them access to your behind the scenes. You can give them little sort of promo snippets to post maybe, and then by the same time you might reward them with money, or you might reward them with cinema tickets or whatever it is appropriate for that partnership. So you're creating a partnership that has value both ways, essentially. So you can sort of almost get yourself a small group of what I would call co-creators and get them almost to work with you as you go through the whole production process, which is a little bit of management, but actually you're bringing them into your world. And the quid pro quo is that they will then shout about your world to their followers.
Well, it actually leads me on to what I was going to ask you, because I was going to say, a lot of the time, I feel like, especially with independent filmmakers, we go, well, we haven't got any budgets, we've got to pay for this, we've got to pay for that. But actually, I mean, you need an audience for your film to be successful, and that's a wonderful way of...
Well, it doesn't have to be money, it doesn't have to be money. And also at the universities there are some really good schemes. So Falmouth, for example, will give you an intern for however many hours, and that there's a small admin fee of around £100. I think, don't quote me on that, but a lot of the universities have some very good internship schemes, summer placements, things like that. There's an amazing company called Kappa who bring American interns over all the time. So you can find people who need experience and would be really, really glad to work and help on a film to be able to get that experience.
That's really useful. That's really useful to know.
And it's not exploitative in so much as they have to do their placements and they need proper industry experience. So, yes, okay, you sort of feel like, oh, well, you can't give very much money, if any at all. But actually you're helping someone to access the industry and get real good, valuable experience. And then they might in turn be posting about that. You can encourage them to post about that.
That's and also I suppose that as well then with like the cast and crew, when you're actually making the films, would you be getting them to be involved in that as well, doing their own bits to their own platforms?
Well, I think you certainly can ask that. I mean, whether a professional crew would be up for that, but I think certainly cast members may well be, if you give them permission, because often, I mean, certainly when I work as a freelancer, I don't post about anything I do because I worry that I shouldn't be, but actually if you almost get them all together and go, right guys, we're going to create some buzz about this and can everybody pitch in, then most people will, because you need something to pop on your LinkedIn, don't you, to get the next gig. So, you know, nothing's altruistic, Liz.
No.
Let's face it.
And what about some more sort of traditional sort of forms of media, like with journalists and?
Well, yeah, that works well. I think also for it's great to invite journalists in. Obviously, you're opening yourself up to scrutiny,
Yeah.
so it's worth being a little bit careful about which journals, which publications, and again, that comes back to who you're trying to reach.
Yeah.
But also for an older audience, that can be really interesting as well. So you think about the number of local radio stations around and how much airtime they've got. If you're shooting in a particular location, for example, it might be a really good idea to contact your local radio station and ask them to come on down and do some interviews, and that can work really well for an older audience. And you can hop into different charities as well, different community groups for screenings and sort of reach people that way.
Right, that's interesting.
Yeah, I do. I work with the St Ives School of Painting, actually. I'm a trustee down in lovely Cornwall, so I get to go down there a bit. But a lot of their youth work is via local charities. So they're pushing out via people who are already working with young people, rather than saying, you now need to come to the school, which might feel like a big ask, you know, transport-wise, and also just walking into a building, an unfamiliar building. So, you know, it's worth thinking about your audience, whether they are vulnerable, whether they're neurodiverse, whether they're, you know, all of those things, and just sort of thinking about how you invite them into your process and invite them into your screenings and what that journey is for them as well.
Which I suppose comes back to the whole thing of doing it as well before you've actually made the film, because if you're thinking about those things first of all, then you're going to have the interest in the film before it's even been made.
And the pacing will be different. So if your film's for a young audience, I made a show actually for the Navy the other day that was for young people, to tell them all about being a woman in the Navy, and we actually cut it really tight, so it's like a YouTube cut, you know, like the YouTube videos where if we edited ourselves now, then, you know, you would speak immediately, I finished speaking, rather than, you know, the little pause that you normally have. And so, you know, if you're cutting for a young audience, you might up the pace quite significantly, whereas if you're cutting for an older audience, then it's much more likely to be a sort of traditional TV pace. And you can just watch things on air and see that in action. So if you look at a TV series like I May Destroy You, for example, that will be a very different pace of cut to something like Happy Valley, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, but you can see that more and more now, can't you? I just saw the other day that I Hate Susie, and that had that same, you can see it's really sort of aimed at a different audience.
Yeah, exactly.
It's with TV programmes, there's quite a lot to learn from them, isn't there? I mean, their marketing, the way that they market things across social media and that as well.
Yeah.
Do you think, you know, if you've got a short film, that they are a good example to go and sort of take some ideas from?
I think so. And obviously, you know, people will say, well, what if there's no budget? But actually, you know, you'll find as you go through your whole shoot that there are opportunities to shoot little promos. There's probably plenty on the cutting room floor that you can repurpose. So just having someone looking at extra content and behind the scenes as you go along is a really good idea. And then again, you know, having an objective view of those promo edits. So it may be that you want to get someone else to direct those edits because they can be objective and they can sort of pull out the key points. Whereas when you're very close to a script and a film, it's quite hard to do that.
Yes.
Which is why the whole TV promo industry built up in the first place, because back in the day, the producer would just cut their own trail, you know, but a massive industry has grown because that didn't necessarily work so well. You know, you need someone to come in and go, right, what's the main thing here for that particular audience? And that's a little bit of a dark art, I suppose. But I mean, I suppose it's so important, though, isn't it, as a filmmaker, to kind of really explore all those different avenues and bring in delegates with those things as well. Yeah, absolutely. That is where you can get a bright intern to kind of really help you. Actually, just sort of looking at what they think is interesting and a different take on things can be quite helpful.
Cool. And also at the moment you're working with musicians, aren't
Yes.
you? Yeah. So
I do a lot of music actually.
oh, lovely.
Yeah,
So
lovely.
I mean, how similar is that, you know, with looking at what you do within TV and film, going into the music industry at the
Yeah,
is
I mean,
similarities?
it's yeah. I mean, I guess as a producer, it's not just it's a multi-camera shoot at the end of the day, albeit, you know, a lovely one with a lot more complicated requirements. But you know, I think from the perspective of the storyteller, the thing is the same, really. All the arts, we're all narrative storytellers at the end of the day, whether you're making a film or painting a painting or, you know, creating a piece of music. And it's that whole thing of understanding your craft to start with. So I always used to tell my interns, you can't cut up the cow before you've learnt the still life, you know, learn your craft and then deviate, you know, for a reason and know what that reason is. But equally, you know, you're creating a story through music in the same way as you're creating a story through your film. And okay, it's not so overt, but it still has a start, a middle and an end. It still needs to have a sort of a kind of purpose to it, I suppose, in its intention. And I firmly believe that the arts have the power to really cross cultural boundaries. And I think we're on the cusp of that, because if we start to if we stop looking at things as geographical locations and geo-blocking here, there and everywhere, and actually start sharing across cultures, that's how we can create global understanding, which God knows we need at the moment.
Just a little bit, yes.
So, you know, we as filmmakers and as artists, I suppose, in the round, we have a responsibility to use our craft, in my view, for the greater good. And if you've got a story to tell, then get it out there, because it's no good sitting in your cupboard collecting dust, is it?
Well, that brings me to my final question. How important are film festivals to all of this?
Oh, well, very interesting. Well, obviously, so holy. Extremely important.
Well,
yes. It is important, because I think it gives filmmakers an outlet, and that, you know, that can be a real frustration. And the sort of thing that will make you give up is if you make your film and you find that nobody's seen your film. Whereas what you're doing here is amazing, because you're giving voice to those people and to films that are actually quite challenging as well. Not necessarily mainstream entertainment. So that is really important, to have diverse filmmakers, diverse stories told, so that we can all experience, you know, the things that other people experience. And that's what film's all about, really.
Oh, it really is, isn't it? Because we need audiences to see them.
Yeah, and, for sure.
Yeah, and everything we can do to help that is amazing.
Yeah, it's brilliant. It's brilliant.
Well, look, thank you so
pleasure.
much. I mean, it's just really useful stuff. I'm going to be watching this back going, right, okay. So make sure that you do. I hope you've taken notes and listened properly, because that's an absolute wealth of experience that you've got.
Oh, thank you, Liz. That's
thank you very, very much. And thank you for watching.